Hey everyone, welcome to a special bonus episode of Electoral Dysfunction. This week, the panel talked a little bit about John Lewis's funeral, about Barack Obama's speech where he dared to politicize the funeral of a political leader who believed in politics as a way to get things done. And then we talked a little bit about the filibuster. That's right, the filibuster, the sexiest thing we could discuss. It's a great conversation. So I'm going to send you over to it right now. You're going to hear Hannah Bell, Oliver Willis, Rachel Semigren, and Robert George discussing the filibuster. Ned Thorne, star wipe me to the bonus episode. This week we saw the funeral of former congressman and hero, like one of the greatest Americans to ever live, John Lewis, and three former presidents. One of them great. I'll be fair. My interest in bipartisanship. Normally I just dump on Bush, but what the hell? I'm not a big Bill Clinton fan, so I'm going to be fair. I'm going to take on a Republican and a Democrat. Three former presidents eulogized him, with President Barack Obama using his eulogy to push for a few political issues that Lewis would have cared about and been very invested in and concerned for, or as Tucker Carlson put it, coming in as a greasy politician to ruin someone's eulogy. As Oliver Willis rightly put, imagine if there was a war hero's funeral and no one talked about the war.
It's crazy to me because
Fawlty Towers, whatever you do, don't talk about the war, please.
Yeah, it's like Lewis spent his entire life. He literally was almost killed several times for the right to vote. Like, very few of us, and certainly I don't think any of us in this conversation can say that.
100% I can't.
Yeah.
I'm older than Tom, and I can't say that.
So the idea that, like, at his funeral, that is like, I mean, it was his entire personal and private life. Like, I met him once at a book signing for his graphic novel. His graphic novel is about fighting for the right to vote. Like, it's his all. And then, like, Obama, if anything, I thought Obama gave a great speech. If anything, you could probably argue Obama didn't go far enough in the speech at the funeral, if you're going to really criticize it. And it's part of this trend, we've seen it with MLK. It's trying to depoliticize very political figures. Like, Martin Luther King was reviled when he was alive. He was literally killed because of what he believed. And then we come up with this whole idea of, like, he's like a fuzzy teddy bear of, he made a speech and then everyone said, you know what, blacks should have rights. And like, no, like that's not.
Kumbaya, there we go. Boom.
Yeah. He gave one speech. He said, I have a dream. And everyone said, you know what? He's right. Let's have civil rights.
I have dreams too, just like him.
Like it wasn't a fight, and it's still a fight. But that's the thing. Like, I think that the conservatives and Republicans that went after him, they don't think that these things are still a fight. Like, there's this compartmentalization that happens all the time where it's like, civil rights was this thing over here. Then Obama won, which proves that civil rights was done because Obama won that one time. And so to bring it up again is crazy talk because, you see it all the time with people when you talk about Black Lives Matter. They're like, what are you complaining about? Obama won.
Obama won and LeBron's rich.
Yeah.
Everything worked out for you, Oliver.
I got a little piece of it too. I was at the meeting.
Well, and the fact that, John Lewis himself wrote a farewell speech to be published upon his death. And that was great. Political. Like that, he speaks about the right to vote and to protest and all of these things that he bled and fought for us, for everyone, and not just people that agreed with him. Like his righteous fights were for every single one of us, not just people that agreed with him. And I think that that's something that the GOP could learn a thing or two about.
How dare the New York Times desecrate John Lewis's life by printing John Lewis's last
his own words
on the day he was being buried. I mean, I think that's just what the damn liberal media would want to do. You don't want to print Tom Cotton, but you do print John Lewis. What the hell are these people thinking?
Yeah, it was a real insult to John Lewis.
If it were not a funeral, I wish Barack had worn a tan suit.
Right. It's true. That would be a faux pas.
Yeah.
No, that would have been the ultimate trolling right there. That would have been the ultimate trolling.
Well, it's the exact mechanism that we're talking about. Like it's a non-issue. Like it takes things that are not an issue and makes them an issue. So you're not looking at the real issue over here. And to Oliver's point about King, and all those who are activists, like you get reduced down to a few moments of your life and people jump on those in theory, but not necessarily in practice. So you can have a Black president and still have a racist nation. Like that's what we're dealing with, or else there wouldn't be another iteration of this social justice movement in Black Lives Matter. Like it's still a problem, but the mechanism is like, oh, you shouldn't politicize at a funeral. It's just like, but when the person dedicated their lives to this cause, you can't unintertwine these things when you're recognizing their accomplishments.
And remember, typical, because we live in Trump era, and so much goes on in a week that just gets completely elided over because there's a new outrage every other minute. We had an attorney general who testified this week, and this seemed I think to get kind of overlooked because there was a lot of things in that hearing which were just batshit crazy. But he basically said that in terms of engaging with the Portland protests, and let's just stipulate, there were some people that were getting out of control, blah blah blah. But let's just putting that aside. He was basically making the assertion that even if you are a nonviolent protester and you decline an order to disperse, it's perfectly fine for the forces there to start tear gassing you, which is that just seemed to kind of rub me the wrong way. It just so okay. The attorney general said, okay, yeah, tear gas peaceful protest, and then when they respond in a nonviolent way, you could say, oh well, they're rioters, and what happens next? They bring on themselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a citation of the rules. I mean, you can go back to Bull Connor. Bull Connor thought he was acting within the law. George Wallace, they were all acting within the law of the state. Like, MLK and the civil rights movement were breaking the law. They were agitators. It's like the parallels are crazy relevant when you look at what they say about the BLM folks and what they said about the civil rights people. It's the exact same language. They're outside agitators. They're attacking us. You look at Rob, on your side of things, like the National Review, right? Like the August National Review, when they talk about Martin Luther King, they were talking about he's this agitator, he's destroying America, he's burning it up from the inside. And then you look at what Trump says about BLM. It's literally you could cut and paste it. Maybe it's a little more eloquent from the old National Review compared to what Trump says now.
Well, actually, no. If you go back and look at, William F. Buckley, to his credit, over the space of about 6 to 8 years, did move on his assessment of civil rights. But if you look at some of the stuff, National Review started in 1955, and in 1957 and 1958, it was there were a number of essays that that Buckley wrote that were very, very strong, were very, very supportive of the segregation itself. And there were pieces in there saying, well, there's no real example where blacks have been a superior race. So
right.
So you can understand why the whites want to keep their society under control. by 65, 66, it was still a conservative magazine, but they suddenly realized that that was not quite as good as not as quite
right.
as good.
And it's, I mean, the thing is, it's just this whitewashing, like what Hannah said. This like
as it were.
Yeah, right. We just want to like depoliticize these people, and like you go back in American history. I mean, the founding fathers were deeply political, and like I hate when people try to take this thing of like, we have a historical figure here, and this person was a political figure, as if like these two things are always the same, and it's been like that since before America was even America, and it's always going to be like that. And I foresee a future where I'll hear from some conservative maybe 20 years from now, well, we want to be apolitical like Barack Obama was.
One of the
20 years from now, like that's going to be
Yeah.
in a world where like
I actually saw one this week about Biden. Like someone said that like why is Biden going so far to the left? Why can't he be more moderate like Obama?
Well, that, by the way, this is actually kind of an example of both sides-ism, because the opposite party will often point to a person who they demonized 20, 25 years before, and is now saying that so you start saying things like, well, Ronald Reagan,
Right.
Ronald Reagan would be a Democrat today, given what's going on.
George W. Bush never would have lied to people and exploited and corrupted government to his own ends that killed people.
John F. Kennedy cut taxes.
Right.
Why are today's Democrats so far to the so that is kind of how the political game is played. So that's
yeah, I agree with you on that.
I want to speak about something Obama brought up in that eulogy very briefly, which was he referred to the filibuster as a relic of the Jim Crow days, and said, if getting progress on voting rights, was obstructed by the filibuster, that now is time to do away with the filibuster in the United States Senate. So let's take a minute to unpack some of that. First of all, in terms of filibuster reform, this was a major move because Barack Obama, for his presidency, was generally opposed to eliminating the filibuster. And most Democrats were. Bernie Sanders, trumpeted it as soon as Obama finished saying it, but even Bernie Sanders during the 2020 primaries was not like had during most of the primaries. I think maybe towards the end he came out for abolishing the filibuster, but for a while he did. Same thing, Joe Biden. Like your two front runners kind of stayed away from that. Partially because it's not a very exciting campaign issue, but part because as we're
and
about
the Democrats were large, well, except for the first 2 years of Obama's presidency. They were in the minority. Well, excuse me, actually, for the first 4 years, they were kind of in the minority. So you want to, if you're in the minority, you're going to be, you're generally supportive of keeping the filibuster, and if you're in the majority, you hate it. So that's.
I think I want to talk about, first of all, I think people get confused by what even the filibuster is. I think people hear filibuster, and anyone who knows what it means like thinks of, like Mr. Smith goes. That's right. He's a rapper.
I get in on your territory, Robert.
All yours.
Stay in your lane, Hannah. Stay in your lane.
Filibuster rhymes. Robert George's old DJ name.
That's very, very good.
Pretty good.
But it is, people think of like, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, like one person bravely talking until he moves the minds of people. And I don't remember what he was filibustering for in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So let's just say he was filibustering against the Civil Rights Act.
Noted racist Jimmy Stewart.
If you were a hero in a movies in the 1930s, you were probably on the wrong side of history. But, like
I'll say.
But that is just a standing filibuster. Filibuster basically is a senatorial procedure which says that like you can't end the debate and begin the vote without 60 votes in the Senate. That's more or less like, that's me oversimplifying, but that's basically it. So like when like people say Rand Paul or Bernie Sanders filibustered a bill nowadays, odds are it doesn't mean that they stood and gave like a 48-hour speech, though they both have given pretty lengthy speeches. It just means that they're they led a block of senators to say, let's not give them the votes. And then nothing moves. Then the bill doesn't move forward, and whatever it is stops. And that has been generally the thing that has kept a lot of major policy from getting pushed through forever. But certainly for the last, certainly I'd say it's fair to say for the last 16 or so years of a polarized Senate, which has generally been, with the exception of a few years under the Democrats where they had or maybe not even a few years, a year where they had 60 seats. It has generally been a fairly closely divided body, the United States Senate, for the last.
But the funny thing is, I think I don't know, and maybe I'm underestimating the civic knowledge of my fellow Americans, which I've always been guilty of. But like, I feel like most people think that that's really how it works. They think that 51 is all you need.
Yeah.
I think for most people, when they find out that like, oh, you actually need 60, it's just like the Electoral College. Or like, how do you win with not more votes, right?
Yeah.
I feel like this is one of those things where like we maybe collectively sleep through it in school. And honestly, like the Brits, people, one of the counter arguments to it is often, well, if the Republicans have control, they're going to just jam through what they want. And like my position has been in the last few years, I'm kind of like, go for it. Like do the, like the British thing is you have control of government. You can just basically do what you want. And then the people go, hey, did you do a good job or not? We'll put you back in control or not. And so like, my position is, it would hurt a lot of people if, Republicans could just do what they want to do with 51 votes. And they perceive it as we would hurt a lot of people if we get to do it with 51 votes. But that's why we have elections. And like, I feel like the House and Senate should just operate that way. And, I personally, I hate the Senate. Like I have a deep, deep loathing. I hate the Dallas Cowboys, Nazis, and the Senate. Right?
In that order?
Well, pretty much. I mean, the Cowboys are pretty bad.
Yeah, but then again, Oliver is a fan of the Washington football team.
Of course.
So he's a little.
We're not racist anymore.
Yeah, well, by the way, that is actually kind of interesting because of all of the things, the one thing where Oliver Willis and Clarence Thomas agree, it's on the Dallas Cowboys. So figure that let that blow your mind. So there is some while the filibuster was not created to stop civil rights bills, it was used and abused to quite the fare thee well during the 1950s and 1960s, and that's back when it was a real filibuster. Number one,
where you had to stand and talk.
You had to stand up and talk, and so you had people like Strom Thurmond and Robert Byrd, who would stand up there for literally for more than 24 hours trying to kill civil rights bills, sometimes successfully in the 1950s, sometimes less so in the 1960s. And oh, by the way, back then you needed 66 votes to get, or maybe 67, but to break the filibuster. So it was very difficult to push things through. Now, the point is, the argument for the filibuster, and I'm not sure if I agree with it completely, but the argument for the filibuster is that it forces a certain amount of consensus to get big potentially controversial policy issues through. That means it forces you to get some votes from the other side. And oh, by the way, it allows those big policy issues time to sink in to the public, to allow them to decide if they want it. For example, if the filibuster had been gotten rid of and Democrats pushed through Obamacare, and that was a very controversial policy at the time. It was not that popular. It's been the law of the land now for 10 years, and and Republicans have been trying to get rid of it. But because of the filibuster, they haven't been able to get rid of it. And now it is very popular because, hey, there's a freaking pandemic, and people realize how important that is. If it hadn't been there, Republicans, when they got back in 2010 or 2014, might have been, could have had obviously with Trump in 2016, for example, it would have been so much easier for them to have gotten rid of it then. So there is something.
Although worth noting, they failed their latest attempt to repeal the ACA in a 51-49 vote. But that's because the Senate is incomprehensible. It was during what is referred to as reconciliation, which is when the United States Senate says, I don't care what you think. We're going to do what the majority says, which is not what most people mean when they say reconciliation. Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, the idea of any type of bipartisan consensus seems impossible. Right? Like, how does that happen? Everything is so deeply politicized. And this goes back to a real issue that I have with, like, campaign finance is, like, even if, like, you know, to your point, Oliver, about, like, okay, like, we vote for you. You didn't do what we wanted you to do. I don't think the majority of politicians, especially not Republican politicians, answer to the voters. I don't think they answer to their constituents. I think they answer to lobbyists. I think they answer to money. And that's part of why so many of these things, in theory, yes, if our democracy worked, if it was all power to all people and our votes counted and counted in the ways that they should, and we weren't gerrymandered and votes weren't suppressed, and there wasn't all of this great work to make sure that we actually can participate in our democracy. But at the end of the day, I just really struggle believing that senators are listening to their constituents, because if that were the case, so much of what's been happening and what we debate over would not be the case. It's like, you know, rights to abortion access is the law of the land, but we're still debating it. And if you were to poll the American people, the majority of people say women's, like, our choice is like our body, our choice, right? So, like, but that's, we're still debating it. We're still sending it to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, without the courts, we wouldn't have it. Yeah, without the courts, we wouldn't have a lot of those things.
So it's just like, I don't know. I again, maybe it just seems super cynical, but I just have a hard time believing that in the world that we live in right now, that even if it were the case, like, I just don't think they listen to their constituents.
Yeah, but in a in a constitutional republic that we're in, no issue is ever settled forever, and so that's why. And oh, by the way, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think before she was appointed to the Supreme Court, had issues over Roe v. Wade, in the sense that she thought the fact that it was settled at the Supreme Court actually helped create this issue where we are, where it continues to be a political issue, because it was never really settled. It was never really settled politically. So, you know, that's also a question about whether, you know, sometimes if courts overstep, do they create too much of a political backlash that never quite resolves itself, and then that causes people to, you know, running around trying to buy politicians to try and get their way by other means.
But yeah, I mean, I do think, going back to Tommy original, like, question here, is I do think it's good that we are talking about the Senate filibuster, because it's like this very unsexy thing that, like, when other politicians have tried to talk about it in debates, nobody wants to talk about it. But but it's like, but, like, the devil is in the details, and I think our government is purposefully mystified to the American public. You know, they try to make it really hard for us to understand how things happen.
They hate when we understand it.
Yeah, exactly. Because then we go to the streets and we riot. So
no, I mean, if they hadn't taken off Schoolhouse Rock 40 years ago, that's why I understand these things. I understand these things because of Schoolhouse Rock, and, you know, you young kids, you know, just.
I get down with the Schoolhouse Rock.
I don't. I'm a cool TikTok kid myself. Hannah,
Schoolhouse Talk. There you go.
Hannah, please go ahead.
For me, Obama is, if nothing, very intentional about what he says and what he doesn't say.
And when he says it.
Yeah. If he's talking about the filibuster, it's probably because he got rocked by the filibuster in his days as president. And I think it's an initial intent being put in place and how it's been used and misused and abused. Like if Obama is speaking about it, it's probably to shed light on it, and how, you know, with it feels like so much is at stake right now. Not before the pandemic, before the civil unrest. We have women's reproductive rights. We have gun regulations. We have so much policy that needs to be addressed that I believe people filibustering around is just like creating this non-movement in this political constipation. Just like we can't get anything done, and how do we get over that to get shit done? Because people's lives depend on it.
Well, keep in mind the filibuster, and Oliver and Tom kind of touched upon this before. The filibuster has been tweaked by both sides over the last few years. You're going back to the 80s. That's when they first they I think. Surprisingly, Robert Byrd, the aforementioned Robert Byrd, who abused the filibuster in the 1960s, he was one of the reformers, and they shrunk the filibuster magic number from 66 to 60. But first, you had the Republicans threatened to blow up the filibuster when it came to judicial appointments in the mid 2000s, and the so-called, what are the gangs, either the Gang of 8 or the Gang of 14, basically said, okay, let's not quite go that far. Let's let's try and do something where we negotiate and have some kind of consensus again on various people who should be considered for various appointments.
Gang of 14, by the way, led by Robert Byrd.
Well, actually, I'm not sure
if
he was one of them. But I think of like McCain and Lieberman as being like the main people running that.
Guys.
Lieberman.
But first of all, remember, so in the second half of Barack Obama's term, the Democrats were very, very frustrated that the Republicans, in a sense, maximized the filibuster, so to basically make it impossible to get any of Obama's judicial or executive level, secretaries and deputy secretaries appointed, and so they did a slight break of the filibuster and said, you need 51 to get lower level judicial appointments through.
And then
Mitch McConnell decides to drops the bomb in 2017, and they said, okay, 51 to get Supreme Court nominees through.
But I think that's the great thing about Obama jumping into it now, because it goes from being this inside Senate game to, I guarantee you, when Obama said that at the funeral, millions of people who never even thought about it before Googled, what is the filibuster? Because he knows that he has that. That's his superpower, right? Like, he doesn't have the presidential power anymore, but he has that superpower. And it's very similar to with the
drive Republicans batshit crazy.
Well, that too. That's a side effect. But it's like with the same-sex marriage, right? Where you look at the numbers, especially among African Americans, and you look at the numbers resisting it. And the minute Obama said, "I'm for same-sex marriage," those numbers flipped. And he's got that superpower where I think now, people were talking about it before, and it actually came up in the debates, which, that shows you, again, how unusual this year was. But the fact that it even came up in the debate. But now Obama is he's mainstreamed it, and then Biden can just jump on it. It's one of the few things where you can now say, at least on the Democratic side, it goes from Bernie to Warren to Obama to Biden. They all agree that this thing, and once you've shifted the Overton window that much, I think it's going to be gone for real. I think there's going to be a few holdouts. Joe Manchin, pretty much is going to hold out against it, but I wouldn't bet in favor of the filibuster right now.
Well, to your point, to your point, Oliver. One of the interesting things about this year, as opposed to past years, is not only are Democrats focused on the filibuster, Democrats and therefore some of their voters recognize how significant the courts are as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yes.
courts, particularly the Supreme Court, has been. I mean, I don't think I'm the only one, but I think I've always been really stunned how little discussion there have been among Democrats over the last 20 or 30 years.
It's like Roe and nothing else. Like Roe is the only time they talk about courts.
Yeah, no, exactly, and they only always do it as, oh my goodness, this person's the boogeyman. He's going to take, he's going to take away our right to choose away. Whereas for Republicans, the modern day social conservative movement was basically born out of a backlash to Roe v. Wade, and you can track all of the various Supreme Court appointments, particularly Bork, obviously, but you can track the fight and the energy that has come out. We mentioned the Federalist Society earlier on. One of the reasons why Donald Trump ended up getting the support of the evangelicals in 2016 is he ended up taking a list that the Federalist Society, conservative legal group, gave him and said, from this list, I'm going to be appointing Supreme Court nominees, and that was strong enough to get evangelical support. And from what there's been talk, I guess it started in at the end part of this week, that Democrats and supporters of Biden are now discussing about how about what their philosophy is towards the judicial branch, and I think that's an important discussion to have.
I keep saying that Biden should do it and just troll everybody with his list and just put Obama on there and just make it not clear which Obama he's talking about. Put Oprah on it, George Clooney, just Taylor Swift, like whatever, man. Just to get people excited. Like look at every sort of Democratic subgroup and go, I'm going to take this person. Yeah, maybe they're going to be in my Supreme Court short list.
Billy Eichner's on the short list.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it is just like Obama's influence is just that, because it is that great, that it brings attention to these things. Because I'm like, look, Stacey Abrams has been doing this work for a long time, talking about, she talks about getting rid of the filibuster and access to voting in all the different courts, and as she puts it, making it a fair fight. And so it is just, as you were saying before, like the path that it has to get in order to meet the American people where they are, and what they're ready to hear, and how it gets demystified. And I think using his platform for that is really important.
I think just in closing, I do want to say, first of all, I think, Robert, you brought up McConnell and ending the filibuster for Supreme Court justices. To me, that's the best argument for Democrats to do away with the filibuster, because at this point, I'd say the Senate Republicans have functionally eliminated the filibuster for the only thing that they needed to get 60 votes for. Everything else McConnell normally wants, he can kind of manipulate into the budget reconciliation here and there. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but I'd say, like, for his top priority, he's already eliminated the filibuster. So might as well make it a fair fight. But I think Jamel Bowie wrote a piece a few weeks back, or he said it on, or he wrote a piece, but he also was on the Slate Political Gabfest, where he made a great point that eliminating the filibuster could also lead towards the consensus building that the filibuster was supposed to do could happen in a world without a filibuster. Because if it's going to be 51 votes, that could force a Mitt Romney to say, well, if we're going to be doing Medicare for all, I'm going to come to the table now, because if it's going to happen, I want to include my thoughts. Or even Joe Manchin too, all right, it's going to happen. I'm going to be present at the table to help make sure that it works best for West Virginia. And I think that's an important thing. I think one other thing I just want to say, nothing tells you about how old the United States Senate is than the fact that the biggest filibuster reform of our lifetime was, now we don't have to stand while we do it. That is my big thing. Someone
Poor
was like,
Wendy
that was like
Davis.
once Robert Byrd turned like 90, he was like, could they be sitting for
Look,
that long?
look, Tom, you're getting older. You're gonna understand how important that is soon. You young bucks, you're being flip about it now, but in a couple of days, you're gonna be like, oh, I don't want to stand so much.
Yeah.
I totally get it. I totally understand.
100% get it. This is coming from a serious place. I'm imagining Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch being like, we don't want to stand.
I mean, when
I
we
sit for standing.
well, exactly. I mean, you get to a certain point where you say, I'm not standing for this, and you mean it literally. I mean, that's
It is
Well
the
done.
only time the GOP will participate in a sit-in.
Very nice.